So, as the French Revolution makes history intelligible for Marx, it makes visible the material relations in space and time and of space and time to understand the underlying principles of existence or the underlying reality at hand. So, Marx, in relation to the French Revolution, which spurs his thought, which then becomes a political economy of historical materialism, or the transformation of material relations in history through technology, revolution, and civilization, particularly Western civilization and the advent of capital as a principle which transforms in time, which we've discussed in terms of patrilineal inheritance, all the way up through the French Revolution and into the 20th century. We have phenomena which this is far beyond Marx in a political economy sense, into neuroscience, the study of the natural world. We have Goethe, Da Vinci, biology, chemistry, geology, which is a sedimentary history as scientific observation of real time. And we'll get to why this is so critical. It is an exploration of the relations that occur in space and in time, which is deeply Hegelian. The dialectical relationship that occurs in time across all scales, whether that's astrophysical, i.e. Kepler or Galileo or Copernicus, all the way down to historical material relations, which is Marx's study of history and capital, down to the cellular level, or the genealogical level, the subspecies level, where we could talk about Prigogine and the dissipative structures theorem in biology and chemistry. So what we're looking at across scales is sedimentary history as this scientific observation of real time in a macro and a microcosmic sense, as I've discussed prosthetically via the telescope and the microscope. This is the inquisition into nature, which is the scientific revolution of Western civilization, which produces, via scientific advancement, the technological apparatuses of everything from the machine gun to the atom bomb to the airplane to the car to the microscope to the Chicago pile. So these relations, which I'm calling historical sedimentary because they accumulate over time and leave residue, which is the sedimentary ground of history. You can see the pathways the Roman centurions marched upon, which are laid into the earth progressively as historical time moves. Literal bodies and epochs of history being laid into the earth. It's a geological time scale. This is the time scale we're examining as a cosmology and a cosmogony. This cosmos is a cosmos of relationships, and this is even in a solar system and galactic sense in terms of the mass of stars, the fusionary mass of stars, and how networks of galaxies form and transpose themselves in and upon space in a gravitational relationship due to the literal density and mass of the body in space and in time. We're looking at these relations as movements, transmissions, and transformations of energy, everything from stellar fusion down to the formation of cells and the compounding of cells or molecules to form compound beings, compound bodies with complex nervous systems, etc. This is itself the gleaming, this process of transformation, which is observable across scales, and the necessity of understanding this gleaming, which Hölderlin elucidates in a poetic fashion and Heidegger zeroes in on as a critical function of perceiving and understanding being, that in a Western civilizational historical sense, of the foundation of scientific disciplines from the telescope to the microscope as a full-throated phenomenological inquisition into the foundations of nature. It is the establishment, historically, of material conditions so structural and superstructural conditions can be understood. And this is what Marx grasps through the historical phenomenon of the French Revolution in terms of his structural political economy of energetic transformation relationship between man and machine, but also the foundation and establishment of capital as a material relation, which is occurring as a as yet unacknowledged subconscious substratum, which is being articulated through the Western civilizational time current into global modernity. That Prigogine's dissipative structures or Einstein's revolutions in space-time, it is the elucidation of the substratum of phenomenon, which again includes Newton's gravity, that is informing the presencing of being into space and into time, which is everything from the leaf dropping from the tree to fungal spores to the Russian Revolution in the 1910s to the inner psychological and existential movement of Dostoevsky's literature to the formation of the Milky Way. And these all appear to be disparate and non-connected phenomena, but to inquire into them at depth and to find their fundamental structural realities is to begin to allow for the emergence of a true unified understanding of, as I've described and discussed, the operator identity, which moves through perceived substrates, which is everything from the tree to the cell to the stone to the archive of Marx's historical, literary, and political economic works, philosophical works, to ancient Chinese empires. And so this is the ability to understand the cosmological historical material current of all space and all time as an operator identity, as a superstructural character, which is the emergence of being into space and into time phenomenologically. And this is critical in terms of what this groundswell of Western philosophical and scientific technological modernity allows for. And it emerges through industrial technological modernity, because it is the acceleration of energetic possibilities through the dredging up of fossil fuels. It is an increased energetic capacity, which is the emergence of the political power of what is dredged up from beneath the earth. It's deeply Platonic in a Greek sense. Historical claim on history that emerges in modernity, that is fundamentally, again, in terms of a paradigm shift or a phase change of history, different than what was possible before. The human capacity emerges into a engineering thrust and an engine thrust made possible by the interlocution of thermodynamics and fossil fuel exposition from the earth. So what occurs here, and what I want to get really deeply into, I may just elucidate quickly a quotation which I found to be quite important. That these perceptions of the everything from the electron valve to Rimbaud's poetic excursions, technological innovations of the vacuum tube and heavy industry, and poetic techniques which are being used. This amplification of power from small units. I'm just excerpting here briefly high energy levels by a mechanism in which important details of control are carried out at or as these levels. These are quick excerpts from a letter from Marshall McLuhan to Norbert Wiener. And I want to drop those, the situational superstructural analogy, which I have also made a connection between Prigogine's dissipative structures and what I have found in terms of the operator identity, which is the operation of pseudo-closed constraint architectures, systems, cells, in space and in time, and how their persistence functions across substrates. This itself is, this may be slightly abstract, the idea transmission, which is to say the operator identity itself, constraint architecture, transmitting through translation, which is the perceived substrate, which is the phenomenological appearance of beings, cell, tree, French Revolution, and the process of the historical exposition which occurs in and through Western civilization in terms of the foundation which is laid on in the concept of subjectivity or the individual, that we have this theory of capital elucidated by Marx, which is translated into everything from Arabic to English to Russian to French to German to Japanese to Chinese to Italian. This process of being in translation of this idea, this is understood culturally, historically, and civilizationally, particularly through literary or linguistic translation, as in the insurrection into and the emergence of the operator identity, which is a process of inquiry which is occurring across the entirety of human history, and the emergence of groundswell techniques such as Marx's political economy or Prigogine's dissipative structures or Newton's gravity or Einstein's space-time, that these are primary supraphysical or metaphysical linguistics which are from different dimensional perspectives hitting at this operator identity groundswell, which is again persistence against constraint of pseudo-closed systems in an entropic universe. Cells, so to speak, or prisms through which this apparatus is functioning, and these prisms themselves have different configurational architectures which then are processing and translating this procedure differently in space and in time, which creates phenomenological difference. So this is the perspectival language of the universe, as in formal appearance of diversity, which is linguistic itself, derived primarily from this chain, which is thermonuclear transformation, an astrophysical or cosmological phenomenon, into genome and configurational architectures at the Earth level, but also stellar architectures and galactic architectures at the astrophysical or cosmological level. So we're looking at a superstructural or metastructural phenomenon, which is the operator identity, occurring through these different apparatuses, all of which themselves are elucidations of this same structural or skeletal principle at work in the world. And what captivated me a little earlier was Picasso's deconstructions of the bull and the minotaur, and the humanism applied, or the cosmism applied to his elucidations of the bull and the minotaur as a archetypal symbolism of the transformation of man from this primordial genealogical groundswell, which is fundamentally violent and a-forebrained, so to speak, as in without this evolutionary transformation, the primordial substrate of the animality of man, which is itself deeply founded in nature in an unbroken sense without the critical reflexive capacity. So the reason why I bring that up, when Picasso deconstructs the bull into a skeletal outline from this fully fleshed out human-eyed minotaur figure, which stretches between the appearance of the anthropomorphic universe of the time of mankind into the evolutionary past, what is being deconstructed with this letter from McLuhan to Norbert Wiener, is this superstructural skeletal systems process, which is operating across and through space and time, and this metaphysical structural transformation occurring in space and time via the evolution and transformation of constraint architectures, which is an informational technological revolution at a cosmological level through different spheres and scales of constraint, which is to say everything from the superstellar, the nuclear, down into the metabolic chambers of organisms and the cellular respiratory chambers of cells, and the constraint architectures of configurational devices, which are mountains or stones, which themselves are at a low resolution entropic state and exist across massive time scales because they are not in relational regulatory configuration or configurational states, architectural states. They are not intimately in the energetic processing, transformational, neural, cellular relationship to nature, which is a high energy state of transformation. It is a different time scale of relation to being, which is itself a deeply psychedelic experience, and it is itself the birth of consciousness through delicate energetic neural architectures which are transmitted through genome structure, as in reproduction or recombination in the organism sense, the plant sense. So what is understood by these transformational theorists, McLuhan and Wiener are two of them in this period of time, as is Prigogine, is that at a sufficient level of depth of understanding these disciplinary structures, there is a total inquisition into the foundational metastructural articulation of being, as in the character, which emerges in everything through Rimbaud's poetry, to cellular metabolism and the chemistry of cells, electron valves, vacuum tubes in heavy industry, and the poetic techniques of Joyce and Eliot in the construction of their works. To further quote, their use of illusion as situational analogy effects an enormous amplification of power from small units at the same time that it permits an unrivaled precision. Their stripping of rhetoric and statement corresponds to your observation that it is no longer necessary to control a process at high energy levels by a mechanism in which the important details of control are carried out or at or as these levels. He says Mallarmé made this observation about his own poetic technique in 1885. In short, appearances and pedagogical limitations aside, there never is or can be a dichotomy between top-level perceptions and procedures in the arts and sciences of an age. So this is a coming into consciousness or a maturation of the human process of knowledge acquisition, as in self-understanding at a cosmological level, not just at an individual level. And it's critical that Rimbaud is mentioned here in relation to the electron valve process that Wiener is describing, that McLuhan says represents a principle discovered in 1870 by Rimbaud, applied to poetry and painting at the time. What the connection that McLuhan is making is that as the emergence of modernity occurs, there's a real-time consolidation as an emerging revelation, superstructurally, that across experience or across the architecture of the cosmos itself, there is a fundamental metaphysical characterological emergence which is being, which is the great historical and philosophical project of humanity, which is to understand being, or articulate being, or be in relation to being, which is emerging through these disparate substrates of inquiry. And this resemblance is coming into high contrast or high fidelity picture and is being unified by these transdisciplinary theorists who are making possible and making visible from the material relations which are being articulated by these different fields, whether it's science or cosmology or history of poetics or philosophy, making visible the metastructural architecture, which is itself, as applied across scales and dimensions, an articulation of the character or the essence or the operator identity of being itself. And to return to Picasso's bulls and minotaurs, this is a process of rendering out from under the phenomenological appearance of the real. And this is why art is so historically and fundamentally critical, as is surrealism itself as an emergence of modernity. Out from under the appearance of the real emerges through inquiry into what produces the phenomenological appearance of reality. And this is the Blakean intuition which guides philosophical and scientific modernity, which is again inquisition into the technologics of being, or the informational technology of being. That this process of deconstructing is not necessarily the right word, but rendering from the appearance, which is primarily sensual, that the human being has a sensory field of experiencing being, which is itself, again, the perspectival language of the universe, which is articulating human being. The formal appearance of the human being as a linguistic phenomenon derived primarily from the chain of thermonuclear transformation into genome architectures and configurational architectures. That from this mode of persistence, which is a deep time historical emergence of the forebrain, the nervous system, the human being as a species function, it is perceiving beneath and beyond the veil of the articulation of the emergence of the organism self, which is a pseudo-closed thermodynamic boundary, which is consuming and excreting energetic forms and products, which themselves have particular configurations, which is to say meat or fecal matter or urine, etc. Semen especially, right? When we're talking about the transmission of information, that this is the phenomenological appearance of the world or of the universe as in being in time, and the question of being in time is peering beneath and beyond this seeming diversity of phenomenological substrates into the operator identity which produces them, which is working through them. And thus it is to understand the character of being, not simply the mechanical behavior of being, but that which produces the movement of being in time. And this is a sophisticated understanding only possible through the modernity which produces Fermi's fusion machine in practice, technological practice, but produces Picasso's bulls and produces the poetic technique of Mallarmé or Rimbaud, which is deeply connected to Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin's work on the nature of stars, the composition of stars. That this is a multifaceted, interdimensional articulation by the Inquisition into the experience of being, which is the existential condition of being human. Camus or Rimbaud or Picasso in relationship to the architecture of the bull, and the genealogical space-time and the pull of the past and the present of the experience of being human. The ancestral genealogy, which is actually transspecial. This exploration in relation to the chemistry of cells, cellular biology, in relation to thermodynamics, as in Maxwell or Boltzmann, the composition and articulation of space-time, as in Newton or Einstein. These explorations across scales and dimensions themselves create articulations at nodes of being, which allow for the full face and full form articulation of the full picture of being to emerge. And this is occurring again through the perspectival language of the universe as in the formal appearance of the human being, which is a linguistic transformation, as in the genome, of thermonuclear energy across deep time. So the transmission of this fundamental idea, which I've described clearly as the operator identity itself, is the making visible of the underlying energetic, transformational, informational, technological current of thermonuclear energy as it is translated and is translating down through substrates, which are encountering via substrate difference, which is a tree or a human being or a stone or a rock, this fundamental principle at work in the entropic universe or the natural world or the cosmos differently, and as such is processing it differently at an existential level. And this is why, again, I've said existential philosophy and existential literature is the primary evolutionary revolution, or the vanguard of what it is to be human, because it is articulating directly the experience of being human, unmediated by, we could say, cultural presumption, or even the allowed presumption of identity. When Rimbaud says the I is another, he's saying that there is a space beyond this pseudo-closed boundary, which is the name and the number of the organism, which is the perception of a closed order of a self, and that there really is an energetic substrate at work in the root of being itself, which is visible everywhere and is yet veiled by the phenomenological appearance of substrate difference, which is, again, Hölderlin's gleaming. Nature's gleaming is higher revealing. These are the historical sedimentary relations as the movement of energy. This is what is so powerful in modernity, is that there's a recursive process of linguistic translation. Again, Marx in every language from Arabic to Chinese and Italian, which is the real-time reflection of the human being as an iterative genomic infrastructure in information technology, which is becoming, through scientific and technological revolution, the revolution of modernity, everything from psychology to neuroscience to biology to political economy to history, that is becoming recursively aware of this informational technological superstructure of being itself as these high fidelity, intricate, highly complex codes and systems which are occurring at different substrate levels and have different substrate identities, such as biochemistry or the exploration of the human condition via the poetry of Rimbaud. That through this exploration or this inquisition or this journey which is being undertaken into the depths of these substrates, the superstructural condition or character which is being expressed at the base of them infrastructurally, which is to say the deconstruction of Picasso's bulls into linear skeletons or linear forms, the stripping away to the bare articulation or the bare character beneath the phenomenological appearance. In all of these different dimensions of articulation is the possibility of articulating the operator identity, which is in progress and in movement and in expression through all of the different substrates. So this recursive translation of Marx is this exact process of beings folding over into and upon being itself. But there never is or can be a dichotomy between the top-level perceptions and procedures in the arts and sciences of an age, because they are all coming to the same realization, which is Hegel's philosophy of history, that modernity is a hyper-acceleration of this dialectical consequence into the singular realization of the operator identity, which is the character of being itself, the universal characterology of existence. Beneath and beyond and behind this deep time evolutionary field and changing field of energetic transformation through which emerges the human being capable of recursive consciousness. This process of the vacuum tube and heavy industry in relation to Joyce or Eliot, high energy levels in a mechanism, or Mallarmé in his poetic technique. This is the modernity's thrust toward the realization of the transformative and transformational architecture of existence itself beneath all forms. And this is revelation, or this is disclosure. This is the finding and knowing and grasping and becoming, in terms of this deep and intimate relationship to being, as in nature's gleaming, the higher revealing behind all forms, which is being revealing itself to beings. The human breakthrough. The operator identity behind substrate operations, which is the phenomenological appearance, again to return to Blake, that man sees through narrow chinks in his cavern. If he saw everything as it was, all would appear to him to be infinite. And this is what the infinite is and constitutes. It is a character of being.